So I was watching or not watching, listening to the main podcast I listen to, especially wrestling, the only wrestling podcast I really listen to, which is called Keeping It 100. With Konan, right? You got Konan, you got Disco Inferno, Disco Duck, GLEN, GILBERTTI, all the various names he go by. I forget the white boy name. Used to have KG on there. Now they got a JoJo. Right, good guess. Always great. Shout out to Keeping It 100. Shout out to my man K-Dog, number one, first and foremost, for a multitude and plethora of reasons. But so I was watching, I was listening, and what happened was this. I want to go to the YouTube, matter of fact, because I was listening to, I want to say episode. Let me check my iTunes. My fault. Podcast. Episode 148. I was listening to episode 148. Disco referenced their YouTube channel, right? So, and the most popular videos on their YouTube channel. My fault. So what I did was I went to their YouTube channel and checked out the most popular videos, right? So I stopped mid-podcast to listen to excerpts of earlier podcasts. And one video that stuck out to me was a video called, where is that? I just watched this junk. Oh, Konan on Vince McMahon being racist. I have firsthand stories of him doing that. And first, the woman, whatever woman was on the episode, she introduced Vince being racist and sexist to the conversation. Disco hops in and immediately interjects, something that Disco likes to do. I want to preface this before I even really get into it. I want to say this about Disco and Konan. Both of them are some of my favorite. Were some of my favorite people in WCW in the early 2000s. I didn't really start watching WCW until like 2000, 2001. So until like the end of the race. But that was when they were featured prominently. You had the Filthy Animals, etc. Right? So, I like them a lot. I'm going to tell you how much I like them, right? Or how much influence they had on my young life. Me, right? We had built a wrestling ring in my backyard. So we had our own backyard wrestling promotion, me, kids from the neighborhood, right? So when I used to go to school at lunch, we'd be in the lunch line, and I had a homeboy named Tomas, right? A Mexican homeboy. And it used to be me, Tomas, and my best friend, Dayron. We used to be in that lunch line, right? And Tomas would be cutting promos, right? And he was T-Dog, Dayron was D-Dog, and I'm A-Dog, boom. And in my whole persona, my gimmick in my backyard wrestling promotion was predicated upon the promos that he used to cut. So I used to be A-Dog, right? So anyway, and he was basically cutting a Konan promo. He's a young Mexican brother. He sees a Latino brother on the screen, and he was emulating that. And that had an influence on me to where that dictated my gimmick as a young kid in wrestling. So there's that. Now, fast forward, or not even fast forward, my contemporary, my little brother, 3 years younger than me, he also had his own gimmick. His gimmick was directly influenced by Disco Inferno, GLEN GILBERTTI, because he liked the name Disco Inferno, so he changed his name to Raging Inferno, right, like a raging fire. So as we can see here, Disco and Konan had influences on me formidably young in life as far as my perception of wrestling and what I liked in wrestling, as well as my little brother. So I want to preface it with that. I like Disco. People consistently burying Disco on the podcast, and he's like the running joke. He's like the heel of the show. So I understand everything he says on the show is not necessarily a reflection of his true feelings. I understand that. Also, he may be in a little bit of denial of his own blackness, because you know what they say. If you're Sicilian, that means your grandmother fucked a nigga, right? I mean, it's what they say. You know, I actually, if y'all Google up, just Google his real name, Glenn Gilbertti. Google that right now. Go to images. There's a picture of him with his arm around two white girls, and I'm talking about he's looking black as hell in between them two white girls. I'm telling you that now. Okay, that got a real Sicilian tan. But I digress. I just wanted to preface that to say I don't have nothing against DISQO like that. I don't dislike DISQO like that. I was entertained by him. I'm still entertained by him through the podcast, but I was entertained by him as an in-ring competitor. He had enough influence, so my brother named his gimmick after DISQO, and my gimmick was named after Konan. So there's that, right? Anyway, so now I want to just deal with understanding racism in wrestling. Understanding racism, not just in wrestling, but in general. But we're going to go into wrestling in particular. But I just want to give an outline because here's what happened. The female that they had, the female guest, she introduced that Vince is both a sexist and a racist. DISQO challenges that. And he oftentimes challenges things. He's not wrong for challenging them because here's what happens. Oftentimes, people speak things so much without going into the facts on it that it just becomes widely accepted, right? It becomes so widely accepted and embraced and not challenged, right? So when you're just going off the rhetoric of it, right? It could be as true as you want it to be. It could have all the facts substantiated, right? But when you're just going off the rhetoric and someone challenges the rhetoric and you have nothing to say, it makes your argument totally invalid, right? So when he challenges her, it's her duty to come with the facts, right? But he knows he's preying on the fact, and he's not wrong for preying on the fact. I do it in other instances as well. Everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people do this because it's a smart thing to do. People just say things without backing them up, even though they could be backed up and validated. But this individual, they're just repeating what they heard, so they don't have the facts to back it up. So you challenge them on it, and it invalidates them in the moment, right? I.e., perfect example. Jesus is Middle Eastern. Let's just take that argument, right? Jesus is Middle Eastern. Okay. So we have to now explore the historicity of the concept of the Middle East. When was that introduced to the world? When was that region of Israel that Israel lies in? When was that ever called the Middle East? That's a very modern concept. So him being Middle Eastern and associating that with people of Arabic descent is problematic. Because if you follow the biblical narrative, the people of Arabic descent are descendants of the son of Abraham named Ishmael. Jesus would be the son of Isaac, right? So to say that he would be of Arabic descent contradicts the very book that talks about him, right? But people will just go around, Jesus is Middle Eastern, Jesus is an Arab, not understanding how much sense that doesn't make. Also not understanding that, i.e., 2,000 years ago, the primary inhabitants of America were Native American, right? Now, in the year 2019, the primary people that live in the continental United States are Caucasian, right? Over 60% of the population. But now, if we go to the Middle East now, it's predominantly inhabited by people who you would call Arabs, right? Which Arab, people don't even know what Arab means. Arab means mixed, so it's an amalgamation of various Semitic peoples. Anyway, does that dictate, just because they're the predominant people there now, does that make them the predominant people 2,000 years ago? Of course not. The same way white people were not the predominant people in America 2,000 years ago, right? But people just say he was an Arab because they heard somebody else say it, and they just propagate it, right? So you have to challenge that. So DISQO oftentimes challenges people that he knows are just simply regurgitating rhetoric. I don't knock her from that. That's great because it keeps people honest and it makes people actually know what the fuck they're talking about, right? I don't think that woman was quite qualified to articulate it in the proper way. But I believe I can shed a little bit more light on how Vince McMahon is in fact a racist, okay? First off, we have to understand racism. The Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazis, people who are regarded as white supremacists, white separatists, white nationalists, are truly not racist, right? They're racist at the lowest level of what it is to be racist. You see somebody calling somebody a nigger, a spick, a beaner, using racially insensitive language, etc. you look at that person as a racist because of the words that come out of their mouth. And they are racist on the surface. But real racists are racists that can implement their racism on an institutional level, right? There's an institution of racism that comes from a school of thought that is a far more sophisticated form of racism than that low-level, redneck, good old boy racism that you're used to, okay? So let me explain sophisticated and institutional racism. You may have heard people utilize this phraseology without qualifying it. Let's qualify and quantify it. Let's go into it, right? Institutional racism. Okay, let's take a look at institutional racism and how we could show it. Because institutional racism is racism in deed, not in word, in deed, meaning your deeds display your ideals of being racist versus just the things that you say come out of your mouth. Because we live in a PC era where people are very careful in what they say. Oh, I'm not racist. Oh, I have black friends. Oh, I have black employees. I work with black people. I'm cool. I got a black neighbor. I got a Mexican neighbor. Blase blah. People can say those things. But indeed, let's do it indeed. Some of these same people that got black friends or a black person they cool with or whatever, black employee, whatever, that same person wouldn't want a black man to marry their daughter or a Mexican man to marry their daughter, right? Because that's showing their racism there. Because it's dealing with preferential treatment. That's how you're racist indeed and racist in a more sophisticated level. I'll further elaborate and I'll use the WWE as an example. Kofi Kingston won the WWE Championship on April 7th, 2019, WrestleMania, right? Okay. So the last black person to win said title, right, which is everyone knows is the A title. Not just the last black person, but the only other black person to win a title, last won it January 27th, 2013. 6 years. It's been 6 years since a black person has held that title belt. 6 years. Before that, same guy won it. The Rock, right? July 21st, 2002. Right? July 21st, 2002. So, Kofi just won it, right? He's the current reigning WWE champion. But before him, another black person had not held that belt for 6 years. Before that, that same black person, which is the only black person to hold it before Kofi, hadn't held that belt in 11 years, right? So total, we're talking about 17 years. So you mean to tell me in those 17 years, there was no other black person on that roster that you say was deserving of that title? You're saying that in 17 years, there's no other black person that was on the WWE roster, not only that was deserving of the title, but didn't have championship potential. You're saying that Kofi has not had championship potential in all these years he's been in WWE. Him nor any other black person in 17 years. I mean, anybody that's listening, can you honestly believe that? Because if that's the case, then Vince is not a racist. But if that's not the case, this is clear preferential treatment and racism. Clearly. There's no excuse as to why no other black person has held this belt in 17 years except The Rock and Kofi. And even before The Rock, which, okay, now, The Rock won 2002, but let's go to The Rock's first reign. Had to be, 99, 98, February 15, 99, January 1999, February 15, 98. Okay, that's The Rock's first reign. November 15th, 1998. Rock's first reign. So, when did the belt come out? Buddy Rogers, April 11th, 1963. So, the 35 years before The Rock had the belt, there was not a black person that was qualified, worthy, talented enough, or had championship potential. And after The Rock, 21 years since he first won his first belt, only one other black person has had that potential outside of him. Either we believe that or we believe Vince is racist. One of the two. See, and here's my thing. Let's go to reigns, right? All the combined reigns, right? The person with the most reigns is John Cena with 13. You mean to tell me in those 13 reigns now, he's 4 up on Randy Orton, which has 9 reigns, right? So John is the company, man. If you still want to make him the person with the most reigns, you could have gave 3 of his reigns away to a deserving black man on that roster, right? And he's still been #1 all-time in title reigns. But no, instead we're going to give John Cena the belt 3 more times, though all the grown men in the damn arena is booing him, right? Then if you go to the reigns, John Cena and Randy Orton were playing hot potato or monkey in the middle with random people. Let's go back to 2013, around that time. Hold on. Watch this. All you see, Cena, Daniel Bryan, Orton. Right? Then we got Cena, Sheamus, Orton. Cena, Sheamus, Cena, Batista, Cena, Sheamus, Orton. You mean to tell me in these repeat reigns, look at this. Orton, Cena, Sheamus. In all these repeat reigns, you mean to tell me there wasn't like a black guy we could have just handed that to, even as a transitional champion? There just wasn't. Henry couldn't have got it. Booker T couldn't have got it. Granted, they got that B title, that World Heavyweight title, which was carrying on the lineage of the WCW Championship, which had already had Booker T and Ron Simmons as champions of it before. So that wasn't nothing monumental that they won a championship that was already black before it got to that company, already held by black men before it got to WWE. That wasn't no big deal, and we all know that was the B title. There's not even, #1, it doesn't exist right now. The WWE title exists. The World Heavyweight Championship doesn't even exist, showing you how relevant it is. You mean to tell me in all this time, in all these years, now, I combine 17 plus 35, that's what? 52, so in 52 years of WWE, there hasn't been a black person deserving of that belt outside of 2. Then what? 3 Hispanics have held this belt. So now we got to do the same thing. In all these years, but 3 Latinos been worthy of holding this belt. Now we can't make the same argument about other ethnicities, and I'll explain why. Because there's not been a substantial amount of them represented in the wrestling business in the United States of America. There hasn't. But there has been an abundance of blacks and Latinos who have come up in these ranks. Period. So, do I believe Vince is racist? Yes, indeed. Because only 2 black men and 3 Hispanic men have ever been worthy enough to be his champion in his eyes. We see that because those are the only people on this goddamn list of WWE champions. So yes, the proof is in the pudding. Vince McMahon is indefinitely a racist. And I'm going to tell you what's crazy. What's crazy is good old down south WCW, surface level, base level racism that everyone knew about, put the title on a black man, on 2 different black men, with no problem, before WWE could put their strap on 2 different black men. They only had it on 1 at that time, The Rock. See what I'm saying? That's crazy. But now look, devil's advocate. I'll play the other side. There's 3 guys. There's 3 brothers who competed in the WWE, who I strongly believe Vince was going to and had it made up in his mind that they were going to be world champions, WWE champions. Zeus, a.k.a. Debo, a.k.a. Tiny Lister. Why? Because he tells the story that he was going to be the champion, but Hulk Hogan's manager talked him out of it. So essentially, his agent, like his real life agent, his Hollywood agent, whatever, talked him out of it or did whatever. Vince was going to give him the belt. He talks about that on the interview he got with Rosenberg. So check that out. I believe Vince was going to give him that belt 92. But here Hogan's people screwed him out of it, which displays Hogan's racism, which is crazy because all the black guys talk about how cool Hogan was. Yet we hear how he's talking when ain't no black people around, right? Showing you racism indeed. Showing you indeed Debo gets screwed out of a title reign. Before he's even Debo when he's Zeus. He gets screwed out of a title reign. How many other people got screwed with the level of, how many other black men got screwed with, and Hispanic men got screwed with the level of creative control Hogan had? Oh wait, y'all had 4. It was 4 Latino champions, my fault. You got Ray, Alberto, Eddie, I forgot about Eddie. And you had, what's my man? Pedro Morales, I believe, back in the day. Yeah, Pedro Morales. Boom. So you had, so you mean to tell me wasn't but 6 blacks and Hispanics and all these years of wrestling that was deserving of a world title reign? That's madness. What was I at? What was my point before this? Whatever. Oh, Hulk screwing black men. Okay, yeah. So, boom, Zeus. Number 2, Ahmed Johnson. From the collective retelling by black men who were his peers in the company with him at his time, all but knew he was going to be WWE champion, and he screwed it up from having a bad attitude. Right? I believe Vince was going to put the strap on him. There was no reason for him not to. Ahmed had everything. Right? So Ahmed Johnson. And then 3, Bobby Lashley. Remember when he was getting built up at ECW, he was in the, the big angle with Trump at Mania, all that. I believe that Bobby Lashley was being bred to get the title also. So those 3, I think, through issues that were not Vince's fault, they didn't end up getting the title. But even if them 3 did, that's still only 5. You mean to tell me those 3, Rock and Kofi, were the only black men since 1963 who have been worthy of holding the WWE Championship? Either you believe that or you believe Vince is racist. One of 2 things. One of 2 things. Again, having, and I believe the woman touched on this, having a black employee does not make you racist. Have you ever heard of slavery? All of the employees of the slave master, or the predominant employees of the slave master, were black. And they were fervent racists, indeed, because they made people work for them for free. See what I'm saying? You have all kind of good old boy white men that'll hire Mexicans for cheap to get a job done and still hate Mexicans and still push for immigration reform. That doesn't make them not racist. So yes, he hires black people, he hires Hispanic people. He has to appeal to those people in the audience. He knows not just white people are going to watch, and blacks and Hispanics are the biggest consumers, so they need to identify with somebody. Right? I got another question for Glenn, and this is not just for Glenn Gilbertti, DISQO. This is for anybody out there that doesn't believe Vince McMahon is racist. Here's my question. As a grown man who knows the business is a work, right? I'm going to restate these qualifiers. As a grown man that knows the business is a work, right? Have you ever cried because of the finish of a professional wrestling match? Simple question. As a grown man who knows it's a work, Have you ever cried at the result, at the finish of a champion of any match in the history of wrestling? That's my question. Why do I ask this question? You know why? Because I cried like a baby watching Kofi win that title. I didn't watch it live. I watched it days later on the network, knowing the result, knowing going in that the people willed him into that title the same way years ago Daniel Bryan was willed into that title. I knew ahead of time he was going to get the strap just by knowing how things go, knowing how the business works. It was days later. It had already been said and done, and I still watched the WrestleMania replay and cried my eyes out like a baby, as a 28-year-old man that's 6'4", that got shot at 14 years old and didn't cry. A convicted felon, documented gang member, right now, right? And I cried like a baby watching Kofi win the title, and I already knew he was going to win it. And I know it's a work. I know somebody booked the finish. Why? Because I know what it means. I know what it means. I know what it means to me as an adult, and I know so much more what it means to the little black kids that still turn on wrestling every week, just like I used to do. I cried. Now my question is, Glenn, and to anybody who thinks Vince McMahon is not a racist, when have you, as a grown man, privy of the fact that the business is a work, ever cried at the finish of a match? If you could show me you crying at the finish of a match because of how monumental the finish was, though you know it's a work, and you can answer everything else I said, I'll give my argument up. I'll give it up. But I'm going to be real with you. And let's go through a list here. So you mean to tell me Shad Gaspard was not championship material? You mean to tell me Marcus Corvan was not championship material? You mean to tell me Elijah Burke was not championship material? Because TNA thought so, and they had good title runs, or Elijah was at least a contender in TNA, right? Bobby Lashley had strong title runs in TNA, right? Jay Lethal had probably the strongest Ring of Honor championship run of all time. So you see a black champion works elsewhere in wrestling, but WWE never even want to give it a try. And of course, with only the exception of The Rock, then now Kofi. But that was by the will of the fans, the same way the fans willed Daniel Bryan into that top spot. They was never going to give Daniel Bryan that top spot, right? You mean to tell me Booker T and Mark Henry, they were worthy of the World Heavyweight title, the big gold belt, but they were never worthy of the WWE title? Neither of them, right? There's several black men that have been on that roster that have been championship material, championship worthy, and championship deserving. I'm not saying just anybody. I'm not saying put the strap on Titus O'Neil, right? No disrespect to that brother, but I'm gonna be real with you. He don't got enough charisma. But I think there were several other brothers that's been on that roster, and I just named a few that have been on that roster, especially Mark Henry and Booker T. Are you kidding? There's not even a question. You gave him the B title. Why couldn't you give him the A title? Reasonable question. Did Randy Orton and John Cena need to have all those runs? And I'll be honest with you, Kofi been ready for 10 years to hold that belt. As soon as they had that feud between Kofi and Randy, and Kofi was fucking up that car, if you remember, y'all remember what I'm talking about? Kofi was ready to hold that strap then. He was main event material. He had the charisma. He could be a badass when you weren't trying to make him into a Jamaican when he's from Ghana, even though most Jamaicans come from Ghana. So it's not even a huge problem. Big E, if you ask me, Big E just don't got the best mouthpiece. If you let Xavier talk to him, Big E could have had that belt. Who else on the roster right now? Let me see. I'm gonna tell you who else. You got some sleepers, but you got some guys on the roster right now that you need to work through the roster, but can certainly are certainly championship material. Okay, Cedric Alexander, Keith Lee, you just signed Shane Strickland. Ricochet, without a shadow of a doubt. Without a shadow of a doubt, Ricochet. So you got some guys now. And we can see if they're going to let this turn the tides or not. But you mean to tell me, though, right? New Day been moving all this merch. You put those meaningless tag straps on them. You gave them to Kurt Hawkins and Zack Ryder. So you know what that tells me? That them straps don't mean shit, right? They moved all this merch. One of them should have been had that strap, Big E or Kofi. If you and now you're at a point where it can go one or two ways, where you could turn Kofi heel and let the ego of him having the belt get to his head, turn him heel, turn Big E and Xavier against him, let Xavier be Big E's mouthpiece, and Xavier can get the strap. Or you could reverse it. Let Xavier or Big E be consumed by jealousy, turn on Kofi, and then Big E can get the strap that way. If you ask me, you got Lashley coming up. I know Rush got heat, which is bullshit. Big shout out to Leo Rush. I know Rush got heat, but with Rush as a mouthpiece, Bobby Lashley can hold that title. We know he can't talk, so you got to have somebody talk for Bobby, but he's a top competitor. You see what I'm saying? My fault, I need something to drink. So that's my rant on the racism shit. I've talked about it before. I've talked about it a million times. And I know there's black men who I'm forgetting who are deserving of that title as well. I know it. You know, but it is what it is. I think my point is more than proven at this point.